Can you see my screen all right?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for having me. Thank you, Aaron. I see a number of names that I know. Hi to everybody that I know. Hello to everybody I don't know. This presentation is brought to you in part by Notch Left of the Dial IPA, Session IPA. Cheers. It's been a long day. I'm going to do that. So I'm very happy to share with you some of our work and some of our evolution over the years. And see, make sure I can advance properly. Okay. Future housing and how it's awesome, how passive house is awesome, how standards are evolving and awesome. So I'm going to talk to you about our mission, our model, what we've worked on and are continuing to work on, and then some reflections about it all. And I believe we have a good amount of time, so there's a lot here. I'll try to move through it relatively quickly and leave enough time for discussion. Okay, so mission first. We're a company that I think is of a generation that was born into this just acceptance that there were some very major crises that needed to be addressed that were not being addressed in current models, and growing up in general and then getting introduced to the profession, it was a lot of welcome. This is all wrong and it's all broken. So you're welcome to try to fix it. So our company was really founded with that screaming, in our faces. And so we see Boston as a microcosm for a lot of other places in the US, around the world. And there are probably more crises than these, but these are really the ones that we feel that need to be addressed in every project. The climate crisis, we know, goes without saying. The health crisis, just in the last decade or so, we've developed a much better understanding in more recent studies, just a broadening wealth of knowledge about the health impacts of our buildings and our built environment on us, especially even aside from the pandemic, but now especially with the pandemic. The housing crisis, we need more of it, is really the underlying issue, and then all of the other issues that surround that, related to that, costs, implications to the neighborhoods as housing is being created, leads into community and gentrification issues, which is as stark in Boston as it is anywhere. And so in our minds, if we are not addressing all of these at once, we are making the others worse. So it's not easy to find some silver bullets to address all these, but that's our task, right? I mean, that's the task of our, broadly speaking, generation now. So our mission is to facilitate the rapid transformation to future housing that does address all of those issues. So, we use the shorthand future housing because there has never been a single certification brand standard that captures the entire breadth of the conversation. LEED sort of did for a while, Passive House very slowly, steadily, and growing, but there are always things coming up. So it's a shorthand. It's what can we prove in the marketplace, whether it's subsidized housing or strictly market, internally subsidized or what have you. What can we prove viable now that addresses all these issues? So that's what we mean by future housing. And since our founding in 2008, every project we have done has exceeded the AIA 2030 goals. Not every single one has been Passive House certified, but Passive House has been, excuse me, a major vehicle. It's been the most significant focus for us. We did some of the first passive houses in Massachusetts, and the founders drew a line in the sand right from the get-go. We're not going to do anything else. We're going to show the world that this, or at least Boston, whoever's paying attention, that this is possible today and needs to be the standard now. So mission first, model second. This is really important because it's really difficult to evolve the overall delivery, the model of design, construction, development, realization of the built environment, if you're coming at it from the same model. There are just certain things that business models or industry momentum make assumptions about that bake into everything what's gonna maintain the status quo. It doesn't have to be a major conspiracy necessarily to just be really difficult to change momentum, right? So our approach was, we're gonna do this first and foremost, and then we're gonna figure out what we need to do to keep doing it. So integrated project delivery is something that I, previous to Place Taylor, of course, a lot of other people in my previous firms, I have an architecture background, my previous architecture firms had a real interest in, the rise of Revit as a potential vehicle to help push along this better integration between what's typically a very sort of fractured and contentious arrangement. So somewhere in the middle of all of this is an integrated project delivery. The AIA, with Autodesk's help, involvement, tried to help define it, going back a little ways now. And it's evolved here and there. There are examples of it, but when you're trying to impose a different sort of model, a different structure onto the typical industry standard model, it's difficult. It's really difficult. You're forcing a marriage where it's hard to make that happen. And so for all of the ambitions that every great project has, this is going to be the most sustainable. We've all gone through it. This is going to how do we have the shred at the beginning, get everyone on board, get on the same page? It falls apart as soon as one of those three have any trepidation of any sort. Budgets become a little bit bigger. There's a learning curve. Somebody starts to lose faith, and it reverts back to what's already a really difficult thing to do: deliver a building, design and deliver a building. So we have evolved. We started out design build heavy, with designers doing a lot of the build. Quickly advanced into development, and so our model for keeping all our projects on this target is, in a lot of ways, our most important technology. It's as important as any particular assembly product system, and so I'll touch on the rest of it as well, but you're going to hear a lot of this from me today, because it's really critical, and I encourage everybody to sort of get out of their comfort zones if at all possible. So this is, at a glance, some of our leadership in our different divisions, and briefly, we have 4 major divisions at the moment: real estate development, Place Taylor, Elton Hampton design. We over the last 3 years, we've been merging with Elton Hampton, longstanding affordable housing architecture firm, our construction division, as well as now a sort of standalone tech R&D division. There is some shared ownership between all of these, but they also function completely independently as need be. So in very typical ways with typical clients, we work in all the regular ways, but we also, in whatever combination, can come together to do our own projects. So about a third of the projects in the studio right now are our own developments, most of which we will also build. And so this allows us a lot of flexibility. It allows for a more cohesive mission. Each of the divisions is there to deliver that mission, to contribute to that. And it allows us to say, because we have, if on a project we have multiple scopes, we don't have to confine each to its own very typical profit margin. We can push and pull and make money in some places and not in others in order to achieve what we want to. Again, this is really critical to being able to say we do 100% future housing. I want to introduce you to some of our approach to R&D. Going back a ways, everything was what we call Model A, on-site stick-built. Our project started off smaller, single family, small multi. And so we were able to iterate pretty quickly on the different assemblies and find the sweet spots between, not just what works in our models, but in our energy models, but also works for our carpenters. The constructability is there, works for our financial models and for the pro forma, and finding the combination of those, the intersection of those was very valuable. So Model A, on-site stick built. Model B is all things panelized prefab. This is, we have all the same interests that everyone always does. The promise of greater quality control, especially with the now even greater need for skilled labor. Being able to use passive house level assemblies that arrive on site and are rapidly assembled is wonderful. And the price points are getting to the point where this is really valuable as what, on top of the schedule and just sort of cost predictability. Model C, which we're now just dipping into, is CLT. And so we're about to break ground on the first full CLT building in Boston. There are other CLT uses, some of them pretty fantastic and going up right now. We gave ourselves extra trouble and did a full cellular CLT, including getting variances for elevator shafts and such. So pushing the envelope, and I'll come back to that. So we've always been a bit of an R&D shop. More recently, we started doing product R&D for product manufacturers, providing them with that integrated perspective on the, that intersection of energy performance, constructability, cost savings with constructability, and how all of it, contributes to bottom line pro formas. How much net sellable square footage are you gaining or giving up with a particular system, things like that. We've also, after years of getting away from deep energy retrofits and a lot of triple decker work, we've been a part of a lot of the wonderful recent ideation on what to do with the ubiquitous Boston area, New England triple decker typology. And that has pushed us into developing a prefab retrofit panel system, which we currently have some funding for from the Mass CEC Catalyst grant and are now pursuing next rounds. So again, it's not at the moment, it's not it's kind of more of a distraction than anything, but mission first drove us back to reevaluating how we're addressing the existing building stock. And so can't share too much on that at the moment, but keep an eye out. There'll be more on the way. Okay, so projects, what we've done. One of the earlier projects we were involved with that got a fair bit of attention was the first Boston E+ program project on Marcellus Street. corner of Highland and Marcella in Fort Hill. And it's 4 units, on-site stick-built. It was a 2015 AIA COAT Top 10 winner. We worked with Urbanica, ISA, and we did the energy modeling and sort of energy redesign around constructability and such, and then the construction management. So things like that. We were involved in a few other E+ projects as well after that. Ended up earning us a good relationship with the city of Boston, different agencies, and a best kept secret sort of reputation for, at least in the smaller scale, being able to deliver from that integrated perspective. And so a couple years ago, we were invited to develop the zero emission building requirements for Boston D&D. So affordable housing funded by D&D in Boston moving forward must adhere to these guidelines, requirements. And we took the opportunity to develop a roughly 80-page guidebook that tried to communicate in a few different ways to varying audiences. So developers, designers, builders, best practices through some complex energy modeling, working with Thornton Tomasetti. And it's a great resource. It's not directly Passive House, but it's heavily influenced by Passive House in a lot of ways. They very out of the gate, they said, should this just be Passive House? Why wouldn't this just be? And really it had to do with tailoring their portfolio and the multiple scales that their portfolio was moving into, and making sure that there were certain burdens that were spread equally across their portfolio. So we did illustrations like this just to say, simply put, you can approach it in these prescriptive ways and meet the requirement, or you can, especially in small projects where you're not doing complex energy modeling, or maybe even hiring an architect in some cases, or you can go the performative route and prove that what you're doing is meeting the guidelines. So I encourage you to download that, take a look. It's available on the city's website, as well as, I believe, on the resources page of our website. That leads into part of the reason that we have merged with Elton Hampton Architects. They do larger scale projects such as Melnia Cass, which was completed just a couple years ago, or a year and a half ago, I believe. 200 units, LEED Platinum. They now need to be designing, at least in Boston, to the standards that we helped develop. And so it made a lot of sense for them to bring their scale experience to our sort of consulting side. Also have done projects like this, which relates interestingly to the sort of prefab retrofit panel system. This was a deep energy retrofit, all tenants remaining in place, 500 units, pretty fantastic project. This is South End. And so our current projects are getting into the similar scale as a lot of the EHA work. This is a 63 Moreland Street. It's a 7-unit. This is just completing construction, Roxbury. This is a Bensonwood Model B, and this went up from foundation to watertight envelope in about 4 weeks, and 3 of those weeks were the only weeks that we had any weather this last winter. So experiencing and demonstrating the value of that kind of system. This is near, with a PV array installed, it's nearly site net zero. 31 Tufts, this is Somerville, 15 units, on-site, stick-built, Model A. This was a ILFI zero carbon certification pilot that was exploring how to better orient that certificate to affordable housing specifically. You know, what resources can they provide? You know, how applicable is it? It's a great, you know, especially when you get into embodied carbon side. It's a great certification and provides a great sort of framework. So it was interesting to dive in with them. This is pursuing FIA certification, and I believe is starting construction in the spring. This is Dorchester, 1463 Dot Ave, 29 units. This is following the compact living guidelines, pursuing FIA certification. You know, another good example of lightly subsidized affordable housing, and the applicability of passive house. This is our 201 Hamden Model C CLT project. It's 14 units with ground floor affordable commercial as a sort of pilot. Will be FIAS certified. We're working with an interesting startup that is providing, it's acting as a broker for our sequestered carbon and is attempting to incentivize at the right time during design the selection of carbon sequestering materials like CLT. And so they've done some work with institutions at this point. So we're gonna be the first market rate developer that is working with them. So that's really interesting because there's a lot of, yes, we can do this today, but so much of the economics are driving things, and not just the total economics, but like the particulars of financing structures. So you know, how do they provide enough funding at the right time for us to provide, for instance, an early deposit to begin working with a supplier, a CLT supplier, right? So that kind of thing. Seeing that sort of financial connective tissue being created right now is really encouraging because it allows sort of cutting edge, you know, happy to take a hit on the bottom line sort of developers the right incentive to be able to do the right thing and not hurt their bottom line. So that's really important. Just a few more images of this project. So this is just south of what's now referred to as Nubian Square, and had some delays with COVID getting into construction. So we're really excited to be kicking this off soon. Dudley Street. This is on the Fort Hill side on Dudley Street. This is another one of our internal developments. Currently, it's going through zoning. Currently proposed as 22 units. Planned to be Model B, prefab panelized. There is a community space being heavily internally subsidized as a give back to the community, and is being supported by the HNEF fund, Healthy Neighborhoods Equity Fund, which is MHIC and CLF, Conservation Law Foundation. So this is an exciting project for us. It's we've done a couple dozen projects in the Fort Hill neighborhood, you know, over the last 13 years, and so being able to expand the scale and the ambition is and the partnership is really exciting for us. One Elmwood, this is Roxbury Crossing, with the T stop right there, the orange line. So right over upper right is getting up into Fort Hill. But this project site right in the center here is right on the edge of the Roxbury Community College campus and the Islamic Society of Boston. This is exciting because we're doing all scopes, including acting as developer. This is also with supported by HNEF fund, but it's for a local owner. We've been using the term civic entrepreneurs as reference to those who aren't developers but have land in the city, want to develop, want to stay, and don't know who to call. And so we're working for this wonderful, long-standing African-American family. Been here, 20 plus years, and they want to stay. The owner wants to give his children the ability to stay. And to date, any obviously developable land tends to get offers from developers, some local, some not, but it tends to be, understandably, because that is the model, that they want to buy it and control it and protect their investment. What we're able to do when we have multiple scopes is not have to do that, have more flexibility. And so being able to act as developer consultants, as well as design and act as construction manager for projects like this is really satisfying and impactful. And we want to be doing a lot more of this kind of work. So we're very, very excited about this. It's 45 units proposed. It's currently in zoning. This is rental. So the intention is to actually pull a lot of the ever-growing student population off of Fort Hill, give them a more appropriate sort of compact living oriented rental setup, closer to the transit oriented development, and then ground floor commercial. And so this is, interestingly enough, this is awful orientation. It's broad east and west facing facades, and so the energy modeling is driving a lot of the particular characteristics of the facade. Definitely going to need a little bit more control on that south side as we move forward, but we're still in concept and getting responses from the city and the neighborhoods, which so far has been incredibly positive. So that's a brief introduction to projects past and present. So one thing that I find very interesting is there seems to be, in response to the crises, both the crises out there in the world and also the crisis of the practice of architecture, and the long-running assumption now that it's an outdated model, needs to be updated. There seem to be trends in moving from, or I should say, balancing the fee-for-service consulting, pure objective third-party consulting, with a value capture, skin in the game, first person experience sort of perspective. Being able to say, not just here's how you should do this, but here's how you should do this because this is how we've done it successfully, consistently, is invaluable just to the consultant side. It also, of course, provides a lot of opportunity for relationship building. You know, it's really nice to shift from a traditional architecture background where, understandably, architects tend to have a little bit sharp elbows with each other as professional as we are with each other. You know, a lot of us are in competition and often racing to the bottom, unfortunately. So to be able to work with anyone that we feel we should be in whatever capacity makes sense is wonderful. It's really liberating. And on top of that, the ability to smooth out our business model from that traditional sort of, you know, boom and bust. You know, 2008, architects were the most unemployed profession in Boston per capita, right? That's an indication of something broken, right? We have really, really wonderful, well-intentioned, highly educated, passionate, hardworking people that every time there's a hiccup in whatever market they're in, they have to let go of half their staff, right? That's not cool. That doesn't lead us to to innovation or realizing a better future built environment. It is not conducive to better, right? So at this point, 2 of our divisions are value capture asset IP generators. Tech is literally developing a product. It has its own funding sources, which would not be possible in a lot of cases to pursue if we were just an architecture firm. And it can succeed or fail on its own merits. PT Red is a development entity. It has assets that allow it to have a smoother trajectory and build up a portfolio of assets that just allow for a lot greater flexibility. And because of our model and shared ownership, you know, we can actually engage our designers in the benefits of being involved in real estate and being involved in product development. So I can't understate enough how fascinated I am by this and how important I think this is. It's not just the model; it's also, in particular, how you're balancing the consultancy versus the direct control and do. So, okay. So the other thing I want to reflect on is going back to our model and our mission are the more important aspects of achieving, future housing. At this point, there are enough designers that know what they're doing. There are enough there are enough builders who know what they're doing. Maybe not as many as we want. We want to continue to grow the market and eliminate any perceived premium. But at this point, as far as we can tell, and it's all in the D&D guidebook, there should not be any excuses for not doing passive house level housing in Massachusetts. We used to sell this more on the operational costs. We've actually, until recently, we've actually sold almost all of our own units that we've developed and put on the market. And so we have, it was another one of those, there aren't enough people out there who do this enough to know how to do it. So we're going to do it. And we were the owner, so that wasn't a problem. So we have a lot of experience in selling passive house. It used to be a lot more about the operational cost savings, which are real, but get complicated as you're electrifying. And so what we also realized was, especially if you're doing market rate, somebody spending $500,000 or $1 million on a condo might be interested, but don't necessarily care about the monthly savings or annual savings on the operational costs. What they actually care about is the value alignment. Does this house demonstrate my values? Does it facilitate a zero carbon lifestyle? If the answer is yes, then there's a serious demand. And so that was part of, getting out of the particulars of Passive House. We still talk about Passive House quite a bit when we're selling it, but because that's our compass in a lot of ways. But ultimately, it's a little bit broader than that. It's what was our community engagement process? What's our hiring process, training process? And is the company and is the product reflective of what you want it to be reflective of? That's very clear to us now. It's very clearly what the priority is for anyone interested in living in a passive house. There's also the benefit of the zoning approval process. Most directly, if you're doing an E+ project with D&D, they tend to directly incentivize. But at this point, what was purely mission, we can now say is also beneficial from a business perspective. Being able to deliver that product consistently, do what we say we're going to do it as in the best possible ways we can, means we get support from the city and or communities much more than what we see other people get. So if you're doing if you're going all in and you're saying this is going to be sustainable, healthy, it's going to reflect what you, the community, are looking for. That goes a long way to achieving the density you need. Going at it in a fairly transparent way. Here is what we're balancing to achieve a basic bottom line. To just be able, to get construction financing, for instance, and then work with the community in a way that gives them what they need within that balance. That goes a long way to being able to do what we want to do. On top of all that, the incentives are fantastic right now. Mass CEC is fantastic. A lot of our consulting fees are directly in line with what they are funding. The feasibility study, the modeling, certification, pursuit, it's largely paid for. Maybe not all of it all the time, depending on exactly what the client's looking for, but largely. And then even though we do a lot of affordable units, on the smaller projects, they're internally subsidized. You have a nicer penthouse unit, helps pay for the more affordable units and things like that. We do have now a decade of data in a handful of neighborhoods on selling this product, and for clients who are owning and renting, we're getting that data back as well. The returns are better than comps. They are consistently well above market comps for the full market rate. So if you are selling it properly, back to point number one, and that's baked into your overall community and city engagement process and can help bolster your density that gets approved, and you're utilizing all of the know-how that's out there and consultants and rebates, and you have a good team, you're doing it effectively, it's funded, and you're prioritizing and you're selling or renting effectively, you should be making more money. You should have a better bottom line overall than not doing that. Now, it's tough, again, to the whole model thing. It's tough in a lot of cases to align top to bottom everything. If you're just a consultant, especially if you're just a passive house consultant, not even the architect, trying to educate a client, trying to educate, without any fee to do so, a sales agent, a broker, that's really difficult. But if you can find ways to get them all aligned, scream it from the mountaintop to everyone you meet and work with, and every client you work for, or if you are the client, we don't see any other excuses other than old assumptions and lack of commitment and industry momentum. All these little assumptions that bake into the momentum. So, time is up. The oceans are boiling and all of that stuff. And so, all the way down to the financials. Financials speak for themselves. There should be no more debate. I encourage everybody on this call to arm themselves with everything they possibly can to make that argument, but be as direct as possible about it, because it's true. Data says it's true. Thank you.
Colin, thank you very much. That was a fantastic presentation. We have a few questions here in the chat room, and I'll turn it over to others to ask some more as well. For those of you listening along, feel free to type some more questions in the chat room. You can also unmute yourself and ask them directly if you use the raise hand feature there. We can go ahead and do that. So first off, the clarification that came in, you mentioned the incentives available. You want to clarify that as the Mass Save incentives.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I think you were talking about with the feasibility study. The Mass CEC has provided some funding in some other ways. They did a Passive House, a challenge program that I know some affordable housing buildings got funding through, but a lot of the feasibility studies, the energy modeling, and the current per unit incentives are the Mass Save incentives. Let's see.
Yes.
Oh yeah, no problem. So a question here to go into more detail for when you're retrofitting occupied houses. What's your approach to DRE and occupied units? They're referencing Castle Square, it looks like, but might apply to others.
Yeah. Hi, Erica. How you doing? Erica and I worked on a solar decathlon together back in the day.
A lifetime ago.
Yeah. So I can't speak as much to Castle Square directly, although I'm working with Bruce, who led that project. We're just starting to work with Alston Brighton CDC and trying to do a deep energy retrofit of an existing series of townhouses, working with Onion Flats, actually, and potentially Rocky Mountain Institute, who have an ambitious Realize program. And so we're right now doing feasibility kind of schematic work on it and trying to figure out if we can do something very similar to Castle Square in a lot of ways, and similar to what we're trying to do on the triple decker work. One of the hardest things about it is navigating the codes and what trips codes and what doesn't. It's one of the hardest parts of it all. Do we have to sprinkler the building if it isn't already sprinklered? And what does that mean, and how disruptive is that? In theory, you're still kind of keeping people in place even if they have to be out of the house for a few days, a week, or something like that. You can hotel easily enough for a short period of time. It still sort of counts. So you can get in real quick, do very simple work, and get them back in with very minimal disruption. But beyond that, you actually have to work out rental, and so the panelization, when you're doing something as large as Castle Square, there are a lot more options. The scale of it just allows for the financials. You have a large building, surface to area ratio, and all that makes sense to explore a lot of other options. And something small like what we're doing in Boston right now with Alston Brighton, it's a lot tighter, and so trying to figure out how to work with any number of prefab panel systems. And I'll say we're probably not using our panel system. We're just sort of bringing some of the know-how, but exploring our other options and trying to figure out how that interacts with the systems, which can either be coordinated within sort of chases of that new envelope, or if you have basement, which may be happening in this case, we may be able to do a lot through the basement and only pop up in a few key places. Castle Square had a large, sort of atypically, a large solar hot water array, which we don't do very much of, but it made sense for what they were dealing with. So yeah, all that to say, it's messy. I mean, deep energy retrofits, every one of them is very unique and very messy. There are options. The bigger the project, the more options there are. And a lot of it comes down to how do we not trip code or try to seek relief on certain things that would be tripped in order to have a really, the impact that we want to have on it.
Yeah, I think key there is the size of the project for me. Thank you.
Another question here. You mentioned lightly subsidized affordability. So I was just wondering if you could clarify that. Are you referring to tax credits that you're working with or some other funding sources?
Yeah. From the Place Taylor side, we're really just getting into sort of proper affordable housing tax credits that usually are, 45 plus units in order to make it worthwhile. What we've been doing for the most part to date is either just internally subsidized, just figuring out how to prioritize properly, or things like the HNEF fund. So that's an impact investment fund that is providing highly favorable rates in order to achieve greater impact in affordability. So greater number of units or greater community benefits, sort of auxiliary to the project. Public space, things like that. So I have to say I do not know nearly as much as some of the others that are in our cooperative, but we're creative. I guess bottom line, we're creative, and starting to work with a lot more impact firms. I'll just also say sort of the rise of ESG. There's a lot of interest in big money, private equity, just investment in general. A lot of individual investors are pushing their wealth managers, et cetera, to have greater impact in their projects. So over the last couple of years, we've had a lot of interest from places that we weren't expecting, which is great because we can say, here's the project we would do ourselves. With your involvement, we can have this additional impact, and it's wonderful. That actually turned out we worked with HNEF on a few projects without knowing it. We were designing and building for another client that was utilizing their funding, and so it just took a while to realize who they were and that we should work with them.
That's great. And kind of hearing more about those kind of private funding sources in addition to some of maybe the state or federal financing for affordability is great. As most folks more people kind of type in questions here, and again, raise your hand if you want to ask one directly. I have one for you. Talking about some of the benefits of passive house that you're pushing, and even talking to investors potentially. I know you're obviously pushing energy reduction and carbon reduction. How often does some of the other benefits of passive house, like air quality and occupant health, is that coming up in your conversations? Do you see that as a driver for these buildings?
Yeah, it was always there. So in the last 2 years, absolutely. There have been a lot of doctors and/or medical professionals who have been around over the last couple of years in particular. And it's an easy win. It's not right. It's nice that it's not complicated to describe. You're not relying on fresh air coming in through cracks. It's controlled, and you have great filters, and that right there goes a very long way. You make sure the design is right, and it's not hard. It's so easy to sell. I think this sort of a professional echo chamber is really valuable. It's really important. but it's also really important to keep in constant contact with your end user. It's really critical feedback that architects generally aren't compensated for.
Great answer. Hank, you have your hand up here?
You're muted.
You there? How about that?
Good.
Okay, great. Yeah, Colin, I'm interested in looking. I was trying to keep track of how many of your projects are actually Passive House certified versus not certified. I know throughout your history, you've done a lot of work that clearly was groundbreaking in terms of being Passive House, but you weren't necessarily certifying them. And I'm curious as to what percentage of your projects you actually certify and what value you think it brings to the project, whether it's from a marketing point of view, a quality control point of view, or any other point of view you might have.
Good question. Questions. I'll do my best. If I had to, so before my time, so I was just to orient you, I was friends with these guys going all the way back. I was a development partner on the side going back to 2015, and then I joined full time in 2018, just to sort of orient. So going all the way back, they did not certify everything, or very much at all, because after it was demonstrated, after they did the demonstration of it, and sort of knew how to do it, they weren't seeing the value in the actual certification. Their brand was already well enough associated, and they would very clearly said at the outset, we're not going to work with you if it's not to this level. There is admittedly a little flex in there. There are projects where there's some interest to get certified, either by us or an outside client, and we get to a point of diminishing returns, where you get to like 95% of the way there or 99% of the way there, but the extra cost just doesn't make sense, especially from the design build development model. Having said that, I do kind of wish that they had certified all of them, because just from a sort of branding marketplace, outward marketplace, they were best kept secret. They didn't need to, but in terms of the growth that we're now seeing, we are now doing as a company, it would have been nice to say, we've certified everything going back all the way, but I understand, and I agree, the value wasn't necessarily there, and the mass save incentives were also not always there, or to the degree that they are. So there's a lot less excuse at this point. It really depends client to client what their perception is. We give them a pretty balanced. Sometimes it's good when we do it, and sometimes it doesn't quite matter. We're definitely going to design for it, because at this point it's carbon neutrality, straight up. And so Passive House gets you that far. It gets you so far toward that. And then the particulars of how you achieve that, you add on as you need to. But the baseline is really the efficiency of a Passive House-ish building. And so, we're going to do it. Certifying it says to others that you're doing it, especially if it's a client who's never done it before. You say, it's largely paid for. You might want to do it because then you've gone through the process, not just with us, but with FIAS or FEE or whoever. So we do encourage it, but sometimes we admit that we get to that 98% of the way there, and we can't justify getting all the way. So.
Can I just add piggyback on that question, Hank? I think it's a great one, and obviously with your design build competencies, I can clearly see how certification itself might not be a priority when you have real confidence in your ability to put the building together properly, which is one big piece of the quality control aspect of certifying, particularly through FIAS. But I'm wondering if you still encourage some of the other things that go along with that, like the commissioning and the, some of the Energy Star stuff maybe is a little bit less so, but the commissioning, I'm, a year and a half out on a project that was, hopefully designed pretty darn well, passed, is certified, and we're still finding some systems that aren't quite working right? It's a really interesting aspect of the passive house side of the equation when you go through the motions and you have to demonstrate.
Yeah. Yes, I completely agree. Hi, Michelle. I completely agree. The commissioning is really important, and we always encourage it. And when we're building, we always do it. We've had certified Zender commissioners and passive house verifiers on staff to be there doing that. We always do our blower door test. We always, that's really important just for our own liability, right? Especially even when we're building it, we want that quality control, especially if others are building it. Holy crap.
Exactly. Exactly. For sure. So yeah, I was just going to put a plug for some of the other things that might go beyond just building it, right? That get complicated and take a little tuning sometimes.
Yeah, I'd like to follow up on that quality control question, because to me, it seems that the certification through PHMass it brings the quality control discipline to the project from design through construction. And one of the most surprising things you said from my point of view was that you think that we have enough designers, consultants, contractors, builders to do these projects. And I would disagree with that. I don't think we have enough in the marketplace yet who are well enough trained and have enough experience to consistently produce the way you can, the way Place Taylor can do this. And there's some others that can do it, but I think the majority of contractors and designers don't have enough experience and need the benefit of the discipline of the certification process.
So I have to agree. Of course, there are not enough. Absolutely. Most of the ones I know are on right now.
Right.
But it's so I used to be at Suzaki. Meredith Elbaum was the director of sustainability while I was there. She said something that stuck with me a long time now. There's not a principal here who can't design a net zero energy building of whatever type they're designing. Technically, they can do it. They can all do it. They all want to do it. It's a matter of getting the clients on board and doing all of that alignment. So, I can sympathize, having been in a very similar situation. Icon does great projects. They do great passive house projects. They want to, I swear, I know, I'm going to speak for you, Michelle. I know they want every project they do to be that. It's not up to them.
No, it's not. But I will say those incentives, your point about we have no excuse in Massachusetts. We have 15 passive house projects in the office right now. That's 25% of our practice. And some of them include existing buildings that are getting renovated. So, I mean, and they are not all affordable. So thank you, Lisa, and others who advocate in their communities, because the market is coming a little less willingly, but by a lot of enthusiasm and encouragement from communities that have really put a strong stake in the ground. This is what we need. This is what we expect. And the market is then saying, shoot, if I want to get through my zoning process and get a building approved, then I better figure out how to do that, right? So.
Shifting gears here a little bit, Colin, there's a question about sort of the R&D efforts you were talking about that Place Taylor does. You may have seen the question here, but do you think there's room for other organizations doing this work? What are some of the problems that you're focused on solving through this? And do you think kind of Place Taylor is going to spend more maybe effort or more time to expand this as you go forward?
Yeah, thank you for that. I'll try to be as succinct as I can here. I've done AIA national presentations on just the topic of R&D. I had while at Sasaki, I taking the mantle from Meredith when she left, trying to drive sustainability, and also tangentially being for a time the president of the Sasaki Foundation. I did a deep dive into research, designers doing research, what that means, the range of what that means to them, ways to fund it, and actually became a really strong advocate and consultant for a little while, freelance consultant on R&D tax credits, and defining what the research is specifically that you're trying to do and whether it falls into the camp of R&D tax credit, nonprofit, public good, public domain sort of research, or neither of the above. But putting your quote unquote research in a specific track and then finding the best possible funding for it. We want architects to be doing funded research. There's no funding for architects to do funded research, except for little bits here in the AIA or on the backs of projects. So huge plug for the R&D tax credit, which, over the last decade has become, yes, hand up.
We've been doing it for years too. And it's amazing. And it's like, I think if you have to kind of be plugged in, right? It's not like who knows to go look for that, and who knows that what we do could actually work and mean something there.
Yeah. Every project we're doing what technically qualifies as R&D, and we've been, as an industry, we've been reluctant or slow to adopt it for a number of reasons. Some are technical. We now do a lot more BIM modeling, whatever. Some are political. I assume they're not on, but the AIA's official tax advisor was an incredibly overly aggressive R&D tax credit doer, who helped get a lot of firms burnt, so that the word on the street was, you don't want anything to do with it, don't touch it, right? So there was this huge push that I was a part of, just to get out there and say, do it in these ways, do it in these safe ways, and you should get substantial tax credits for doing the work you're already doing. And if you can convince your leadership to, take those savings and plug them back into an actual R&D program, then we're moving the ball forward, right? So sorry, that's a whole other thing, but man, R&D tax credits, do it. Find the right folks, do it. Have it drive a research program at your firm of whatever size, doesn't matter. Doesn't matter what size firm. Sorry, was that actually answering the question? Some of the problems you were solving with the R&D.
That was a great answer, yeah.
Okay.
Question about if you could talk a little bit more about the economics of multifamily retrofits. So triple decker retrofits and others.
Yeah, I'll be able to talk a lot more about triple deckers. I lived in a triple decker in Jamaica Plain for 10 years, which was one of 5 that was part of a green triple decker pilot program in 2011-12. And the city gave a little bit of funding to folks to get their triple decker up to a HERS 60, I think it was 65, something like that. Trying to see what was involved, how much did it cost, what was, that whole thing. And that was part of what got our heads into, and Place Taylor at the time was also doing them. So we just sort of happened to have co-experience on it, but it got our heads into this fascinating intersection of people trying to figure this out, right? Because there's an urban fabric concern, there's a carbon concern, equity concern, gentrification, things like that. If you just flush out all of the triple deckers, you will displace the majority of the people who live there, no matter how much housing volume you put back. So what we learned was it's expensive. It's going to cost something to bring these 100-year-old buildings that perform awfully in general up to snuff, to make them carbon neutral. That's difficult and expensive. And so a lot of what's been, our specific effort with the panels is because there was a hole there's a need we don't see being filled by any current products. And so we need a product to be able to do what we want to do, to provide like the turnkey. We're going to come in, do this as fast as we can and get out. You're going to be carbon neutral. But a lot of what came out of the triple decker challenge competition last year was, considering other ways to help fund it. So adding density is also one of the goals of the city. So simply put, adding a fourth floor can make it cost effective, can pay for a complete carbon neutral retrofit that would otherwise be too cost prohibitive. It's going to cost several $100,000. It just is. But if you add a little density, that pays for it. So what the nut we're trying to crack is, can you get the total cost down with all of the codes that you trip, sprinkling the old buildings, doing all the things you need to do, and still, new electric service, there's all this crap. Do it in such a way that you can still put whatever, 10 grand back in the pockets of each of the folks who own the flats, or the person who owns the property and is renting it, whatever it is. Actually say, let us do this because we have to, and you're gonna get some more density. You can do what you want with that value. And if you're just somebody living on the first or second or third floor, here's a bump for you to incentivize you to bother. So there's no way to do it without addressing like all of it at once. You got to hit it on multiple fronts, and that's why we're going so deep down the rabbit hole, because a simple, one-sided solution is just not going to do it. It's too complicated. They'll all be replaced, is what will happen if it's not a complete sort of turnkey kind of thing. I don't know how to speak briefly about the economics of retrofits beyond
Well, I just
that.
would want to say I love the mindset of adding density, right? That extra unit, that whatever. I do think that that's a huge piece of the puzzle, because that new construction aspect of it also brings down the overall cost when you're having to do the rest of it. I mean, it's still crazy, don't get me wrong. These are still crazy costs, but
Yeah, or ADUs if you have the space, or sometimes the basement unit is applicable, sometimes it's not, but you get a mix. Choose your own adventure.
I'd like to put in a plug here. We've been working with the EEAC on the 3-year plan for the mass rebate program going forward in the next 3 years. And we've been pushing so hard to get deep energy retrofit funding at a significant level. And I have to say at the moment, I don't think we've accomplished that. We were pushing for a $35,000 per unit pilot program to start it off, to give people some incentive to think they can try to tackle something like this. And I'm not sure we're anywhere near that. But the only good news is they haven't designed the program yet. They're getting their 3-year plan approved, but they don't have a deep energy retrofit plan completed yet. So people should take the time to write the EEAC an email and say, please put your deep energy retrofit programs together quickly so you don't waste half the 3-year plan. and do it to the deepest level possible. There's still the opportunity to try to push for that. So I would urge everybody to go to the EAC website and make comment on that.
I'm remembering there's a point I had hoped to make during the presentation that I didn't, so I'm going to throw it in real quick. For anyone doing market rate housing, in particular condos, I highly recommend working with the attorneys putting together the condo docs for the HOAs. And from the get-go, have it committed to a zero carbon, to a carbon neutral operations. What the rule of thumb is, you kind of design it for PV. It's in your model. Maybe you can, maybe it's set up to put PV on the roofs easily enough. But the developers tend not to do it because it's got to be the condo association who are going to deal with all of it. And setting it up for success isn't quite enough, and you're not taking advantage of actually marketing it as a zero carbon house. So, in a lot of buildings, you're not going to get to site zero. It's just not going to be possible, and that's okay. But we've been, in the last few projects we've done, we've embedded there will be a purchase of carbon offsets annually. If it's a passive house level building, it's not that much. And then you're further incentivized to go ahead and pursue the installation of PV, which right now, if you manage to get the right sort of financing for it, especially with interest rates so low, that's actually a really good investment, just long-term financially right now anyway. So, that we got all this feedback, well, just don't, you don't want to limit your buyers to those who don't want to be committed to it. But we've had tremendous feedback and self-selection and filtering of people who really want this, who say, thank God that there's an assumption that I'm coming in with my fellow buyers that we're going to be offsetting. And generally speaking, it's like $200 a year per person or per unit, or 50, in some cases. So it can just be included in your condo budget, your condo fees. So we have the line item in the projected condo fees, and they're not obligated to do it per se. If everybody didn't want to, they don't have to, but there's an assumption that it will happen, and it moves the conversation forward. And have somebody who's currently talking to you from a recent build, and I have my fellow HOA members, they're the ones I want because they came to buy a place that already had that assumption. So don't follow the rule of thumb. Commit. It will pay off. It does pay off.
Have you had any experience in that regard relative to communities with municipal electrical and who have zero incentive, no mass save incentives and zero incentive for solar?
I can't say that we've had that example in the last handful of projects where we've done it. No, I'm sorry.
Yeah, too bad. I was looking for some wisdom. Okay.
I'll give a plug to Resonant Energy, by the way, just a solar company who we really like. They're incredibly helpful.
We're working with them a lot too, and really having a good experience.
Good. Out of 300 solar companies in Mass, it's good to give a plug to the few that are really awesome.
Any other questions here for Colin tonight? I think we got most of the ones in the chat room, if I'm seeing it right. Sorry if I missed any, but I think we got to them. So Colin, thank you very much. It was a great presentation. It was very nice to welcome you here to Passive House, Massachusetts, to our meeting tonight. Hope to see you in the future here. To everybody, I hope to see you all in person in the near future next year. Until then, happy holidays, take care, stay safe out there, and see you around.